In May 1970, aged 89, 3 years before his death, Pablo Picasso displayed with no frames on bare stone walls a large number of his latest paintings. These crude, raw, provocatively sexual images were met with confusion and disappointment, if not horror. Flocking to venerate Picasso, the colossus of modern art, his admirers expected echoes of museum masterpieces, the compassion of the Blue Period, or the inventiveness of Cubism. By comparison, they judged the new work as incomprehensible, evidence of terminal decline. Were they right? Or had they missed a final statement of artistic genius?
Parts of the society in the European country, even in America, describe Picasso as a communist, as a pornographer, as an antichrist, and most of the population, they were against Picasso.
Picasso always managed to shock and horrify people. Even people who loved his work, I mean, just didn't get it.
It was too new. They didn't understand that revolution in line, in color. They always said, oh, it's not the Picasso we have known.
The great Pablo Picasso was thoroughly feted at his French Riviera home on his 80th birthday.
10 years earlier, the titan of the 20th century had been on top of the world. Public interest in him was insatiable. The bullfight-loving, millionaire, T-shirted genius seemed invincible, or so he thought. I can say shit to anyone, he said.
I think the newspapers are always out for a star, ideally a movie star. But Picasso had the allure of a movie star. I don't know why, but it just happened. And Picasso hated it, but I think secretly got a certain amount of enjoyment out of being a superstar in the eyes of the world.
But in his last decade, Picasso came under attack on all fronts. As a communist obsessed with property, a man who left a trail of broken relationships behind him, and a great artist with nothing left to say. The criticisms of Pablo the man may have been valid, but could it be that Picasso the artist had, yet again, wrong-footed his critics, and that in fact he'd counterattacked with some of his greatest art, breathtakingly daring painting, revealing his obsessions and vulnerability in old age with searing, triumphant honesty? To see these pictures is to get to know Picasso as if for the first time.
Picasso wanted his private life to be extremely hidden. He just wanted to lead a quiet, normal life. But occasionally people got through the fortifications and ended up in the studio.
Picasso allowed in only the most trusted friends to witness the creative chaos. Everything had to be left exactly where he dropped it. Among the few he welcomed were his British biographer Roland Penrose, photographer Lee Miller, and their son, Anthony.
The first time I was really conscious of visiting his home was when we were in Cannes and we went to see him in Villa La Californie. I was about 15, and I remember the kind of cavernous interior. As a small child, it seemed much bigger than it probably was. But the most wonderful thing was the clutter. Everywhere there were works of art and things he'd collected and so on, in the most fabulous confusion all over the place. And I turned to my mum and I said, "Has Picasso just moved in here?" And she said, "No, he's lived here for a couple of years."
In his last decade, Picasso produced more artworks than ever before. To keep the press at bay, he agreed to a few carefully choreographed photo shoots.
Photography was something that Picasso understood instinctively. And when he was in the presence of photographers, it was almost like a performance. He knew exactly what they were seeing through the viewfinder, and he would respond so they would get the best possible image. And that's why he always looks so good on camera. But there's a paradox here, because the Picasso we see in the photographs is a simplified version of the real thing. And actually, underneath that image lay a very complicated, a very sometimes conflicted, a deeply passionate person. What he's showing us is almost the persona that he wants us to take away, rather than revealing his true inner self to us.
When Gary Cooper came and gave me the Indian chief's headdress, eagle feathers, Picasso put it on, just getting on toward evening. And behind him, the door was open. There was no reflection from the glass. Black headdress. He turned sideways. At that moment, unbelievable. He sucked in his cheeks. He became an American Indian. He changed his own profile, just like that. Talk about a great actor. I'm watching him. What's this guy thinking about? Where is he? I never knew. Where is he? You know, not in my world, that's for sure.
Up to now, this performance of supreme self-confidence kept the public satisfied. But times were a-changing. Francois Gillot, who'd been Picasso's partner for 10 years and had left him 8 years earlier, set to work on a revealing memoir. Her book not only told of his work, but also of the painful breakdown of their relationship. Such an account was unprecedented. Picasso was stunned. In 1964, he failed to halt Francois Gillot's publication in America. And the following year, he failed again in France. Fortress Picasso had been breached. "I congratulate you," he said to her. "You know, I always like a winner." He never spoke to Françoise again.
Françoise Gillot, quelques dates d'abord. Vous avez vécu pendant près de 10 ans auprès de Pablo Picasso. Ça a commencé en 1943.
Oui, je l'ai rencontré en mai 1943. Nous avons tout à fait vécu ensemble à partir de 1946.
En 1943, vous êtes ainsi.
Oui.
Et en 1946, c'est
le premier portrait qui s'appelle La femme fleur. Et enfin, Picasso avait déjà fait quelques dessins de moi, mais il n'avait jamais fait vraiment une peinture importante. Alors c'est le premier portrait qui a inauguré toute une série.
Vous reconnaissez-vous le mieux ici ou là?
Non, je crois que je me reconnais mieux dans le tableau.
Vous avez eu 2 enfants?
Oui.
En 40.
Mon fils Claude est né en mai 47 et Paloma est née en avril 49.
Gillot's memoir revealed Picasso's infidelity and his controlling nature. The book sold nearly 1 million copies worldwide. Fame became notoriety. To his horror, the hidden detail of his private life was on show for all to see.
Il dormait jusqu'à midi. Et puis après ça, lui, alors vers les midis, il s'éveillait, en général très pessimiste quand il se réveillait, n'est-ce pas? Il fallait lui donner des nouvelles raisons d'accepter une journée de plus et de lui présenter...
était si triste que ça,
ah oui, toujours le matin en se réveillant, c'était terrible. D'ailleurs, c'est pour ça qu'il se réveillait le plus tard possible.
I think that he was disturbed by Françoise's book because it was very accurate. One couldn't get him to discuss it in any detail because he clearly felt that she'd got a bit too close to his private life, and this was sacred.
A successful artist herself, Françoise Gillot even dared to attack Picasso's current work. She told him, "I always looked upon Cubism as the period of pure painting, and that he'd done nothing greater." To his fury, she was repeating the critical consensus that America had become the epicenter of modern art, and that by the 1960s, abstraction had become an orthodoxy, leaving Picasso, the figurative painter, a relic from a previous age.
He had total contempt for abstraction. He hated American art. He went his own way, and he felt that he was still the greatest painter in the world, which, let's face it, he was. And there was no reason why he should not go on. I mean, what he wanted was just to go on visualizing the world as he saw it.
A few months later, another bombshell. A former champion of Picasso's political work, British art critic John Berger, wrote a devastating attack on what he claimed to be Picasso's loss of direction.
There is a very direct sense of humanity, I think, always in Picasso. He is concerned only with the world of men and what happens to men, with feeling. But there is a limitation in Picasso, and it's what I see as the tragedy of Picasso. You see, if you are that kind of extrovert artist, you need themes, that is to say, significant subjects, constantly fed to you. Now, I think the difficulty that Picasso has had is that he hasn't been able to find these themes. First of all, he did in the waif pictures. Then he did in Cubism. The theme of this was the theme of painting itself, a new language of painting. And then later there was Guernica. But often he has been without themes. It is to do with his personality, although, heaven forbid, I don't mean that in the sense that this personality is exploited by all the gossip columnists, but somehow when you consider Picasso, it is the spirit of the man rather than any single work which dominates and is so striking.
Picasso was distraught. In a very short time, his personal and public reputation had been trashed. For the first time in his life, at the age of 84, he suffered a physical collapse. In great secrecy, he was rushed to the American hospital of Paris for major surgery on his stomach.
Before, when we saw him in 1965, we didn't really notice that he had not been well. And the only thing was that my father had always suffered from stomach ulcers, and Picasso asked him often, what did you do and how did it work? How are you now? And later only we learned that he had been suffering from a stomach ulcer also. But until that period, we never really realized that he was not so well.
The wall of secrecy around Picasso's operation was soon breached. Every newspaper discussed his condition with morbid curiosity. After a month in hospital, he returned to convalesce in Mougins, his country retreat in the south of France. Security was upgraded, and the enormous burden of care fell to his new wife, Jacqueline.
I think what he demanded from his wife or lover, what have you, was total reliability, because it was a very, very arduous job. He wanted her with him as much of the day as possible. So she would have to get up at 7 in the morning and do all the household chores, going to the local town, buying the food, going to the bank, mailing things, all the rest of it, and had to be back by 10 o'clock when Picasso woke. And then she had to be on duty from 10 o'clock till he finished painting, which could be midnight or 2 in the morning. Françoise was exceedingly intelligent, came from an excellent background, was very educated and very sophisticated. Her replacement, as it were, Jacqueline, was very much the opposite, but she performed incredibly well.
Recovery was slow, and Jacqueline needed huge reserves of patience to cope with him. Picasso was unable to stand up comfortably to paint, and his depression deepened. But he found comfort and some solace in etching.
When we first could see him again, he was doing more drawings, graphic works, and so on. All of a sudden, he had the idea of doing a portrait again of me, and Jacqueline said, "Oh, life is starting again." She was very happy about that. We started at about 8 or 9 in the evening. And when he was finished, it was by 10 o'clock. And he immediately phoned to the Cromlin brothers, who always pulled the graphic works for him, not thinking that at 10 at night they would perhaps have a rest or so. He was working, so the others had to work too. And they came immediately, took the plate, brought them back again with the proofs, and he looked then at it and agreed. And then it was already about midnight when he finished. His sense of humor was marvelous, and he liked to make a little joke. And for instance, one day he was talking about my portraits, and he said, "Oh, the next one we do as Macha desnuda, the Goya." And he had fun, because I blushed, I don't know the word.
Yes,
he blushed, yes. Oh, he was so amused. Of course, he never did a portrait like that, but he liked to do things like that.
Picasso's energy levels continued to fluctuate. By the end of 1965, he was still too weak to paint large canvases. But in the hope that his etching work would continue, master printers Aldo and Piero Cromolanc had already joined Picasso in the south of France. But to their frustration, Picasso remained unable to work full-time. With his faithful retinue, including the Cromolancs, he went instead to the bullfights and the beach. Everyone waited impatiently and nervously for him to get back to serious work.
Au bout d'un an, Piero a décidé que nous allions rentrer. Et donc Picasso, qui était toujours tellement drôle, et avec ses bras croisés, pendant le dîner, me dit « Ça vous embête pas de rentrer ?» Alors je lui dis, je voulais pas dramatiser, évidemment, je n'avais pas l'air de dire si vous travaillez, on restera. On rentre à Mougins, et puis au moment de se séparer, Pablo Picasso dit à Piero, est-ce que ça vous embêterait de m'apporter avant de partir un cuivre préparé? Piero dit oui, bien sûr. Et donc le lendemain, on va déjeuner à Notre-Dame-de-Vie, et puis au moment de partir, Pablo dit, j'ai envie de la travailler, ça vous ennuierait de partir le lendemain? Donc, Piero dit non, bien sûr. Donc, le lendemain, il avait gravé le premier cuivre. Et que ce soit toujours ce qu'il demandait. Et assez rapide aussi. C'était une tension surtout. Il fallait pas le décevoir. Picasso les dénudait d'une certaine manière. contrairement à ce qu'on a dit, c'était pas Jacqueline qui refusait les visites, c'était Picasso qui voulait travailler, évidemment.
Cromlech.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, j'ai entendu. Merci.
By mid-November 1966, Picasso was clearly on the mend. The Crommelangs printed his first comic experiments, combining etching and aquatint, and there was something in the choice of subject that confirmed a returning sense of vigor. The Picasso show was back on the road. He even gave his first ever TV interview. As a Spaniard, Picasso had always been wary of speaking French in public. But now the opportunity to influence opinion in his favor seemed irresistible.
Justement, vous aimez beaucoup le mot amour, Pablo Picasso.
Mais oui, même une jeune fille que l'autre jour m'a interviewé pour je ne sais pas quel journal, je lui avais dit ça, vous savez, pour moi, il n'y a que l'amour, n'est-ce pas?
Vous aimez bien les gens.
J'aime beaucoup les gens.
Tout le monde.
Et si je n'aurais pas de chance, je crois que j'aimerais même un bouton de porte, n'est-ce pas? Un pot de chambre, n'importe quoi.
Picasso's campaign to restore his reputation was helped by an authorized interview. It was with Hélène Parmelin, a writer close to him. She directly contradicted François Gillot's negative portrait of Picasso, presenting someone more open-minded and free-thinking, a charming whirlwind of creativity.
Il aimait un spectacle de vie. J'ai eu au fond le privilège, c'était quand même un privilège, de vivre cette amitié avec Picasso et sa femme. Donc de voir, d'écouter, de vivre des choses que beaucoup de gens qui écrivent n'avaient pas eu l'occasion de vivre. Et que je pouvais donner une sorte de vérité autre. Évidemment, c'est la mienne, mais c'est la vérité des choses vues, des choses entendues, et aussi d'un rapport différent à la vie, à l'amitié et à la peinture surtout. Il était ravi quand il y avait une discussion entre des gens autour de lui. Il les asticotait un petit peu, il disait un mot de temps en temps. Rien n'était calme, jamais autour de Picasso, même dans le calme.
Notoriety and criticism hadn't damaged Picasso's pre-war legacy. In the autumn of 1966, his largest ever retrospective was unveiled at the Grand Palais in Paris. "6,000 visitors a day were to marvel at his past achievements. But Picasso refused to join the celebration. He wasn't interested in past glories. He'd recovered sufficiently to stand all day with a paintbrush in his hand, working on a new series of very large paintings.
As I'm about to be 93, I think I can understand what he must have felt. And that is, however old you get, you're very lucky to be alive. And if you are, so long as you're active, you keep going, you do whatever you've been doing all your life. And that was the way Picasso felt. I mean, he worked away like crazy.
I would say that most of Picasso paintings are self-portraits. In the 60s, he would look a lot at television and see so many series on the Musketeers and, you know, those kind of series of the 60s on television. And I think he was inspired by those television programs.
Fight!
Vous aimez la télévision aussi, pas tellement.
J'y allais. Des fois, je trouve des choses magnifiques à la télévision, mais des choses très jolies que j'aime, qui m'intéressent. Mais à la fois, c'est des fois épouvantable. Des fois, je le dis, mais parce que nous, on est là tous les deux tout seuls. Ah non, c'est pas vrai, car tout le monde m'écoute.
Picasso's new paintings were playful and self-deprecating. A swashbuckling hero fighting for honor and justice with an old-fashioned sword. It was the perfect comic role for an artist trying to change the way we see with an old-fashioned paintbrush.
We're way back in terms of subject, but we're way ahead in terms of a new force in his painting, a last great, enormous attempt to go on being the greatest modern artist of his time. I feel that very strongly. The originality of his images, in that, I mean, he's not just redoing old things and not becoming enfeebled. On the contrary, he's becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, right up to the end of his life. The fact of death, I think, was driving him. And I think it was driving him back to Spain in some ways.
Since the Civil War, Picasso had been a Spaniard in self-imposed exile. He had an enviable Mediterranean lifestyle, but, as he said, a man belongs to his own country forever.
There were times when he did feel quite agonized about being shut out of his own country. There was so much of the Spaniard in him, even after those decades of living in France. In 1936, after Roland and Picasso had been together in the south of France, Roland was so inspired by Picasso's anguish concerning the Spanish Civil War, he thought he had to go to Spain and see what it was all about. When Roland arrived in Barcelona, he went and found Picasso's mother and his sister. And his mum said, "Oh, I'm so glad today's the first day I can open the window because the monastery that's burning 2 blocks away, the smoke has been blowing in all the time." They were in a war zone, that's how it was. And Picasso was fascinated to hear firsthand all the news that Roland could bring back to him in Paris. And that was kind of like the first direct news that Picasso had had for quite a long time of his own family.
For Picasso, it was as if the Spanish Civil War had never ended. In 1937, General Franco had ordered the fascists to bomb Guernica. Picasso vowed never to return while the dictator was still alive. He yearned ceaselessly for Spain, but found comfort in his fellow countryman, Jaime Sabatés, a lifelong friend, secretary, and butt of his jokes.
Sabatés was his shadow, I think, in a way. He'd known Picasso when they were all young, back in Barcelona in the old days. He worshipped Picasso, he always had done, I mean, since he was 14 or 15. And Picasso needed Sabatés. I mean, Sabatés was crucially important to his life. But Picasso loved getting the better of Sabatés or making little traps for Sabatés. For instance, one of the things he did, every night Sabatés would come very late at night, midnight or later, to see what was in the trash cans, because Picasso threw a lot of stuff away, drawings and things, and one night Picasso wrote on a piece of paper, "Sabates, tu es un con." Sabates, you are a rude word. And he put that at the bottom of the dustbin. And then he piled all the stuff up. And he knew that Sabates would come later, after midnight, and he would take everything out, and all he'd find at the bottom was a very rude message. This was Picasso's idea of black fun, I think, in a way. But it sort of typifies the kind of relationship they had, and Picasso played endless tricks like that.
In February 1968, Sabates died. Another key link with his past had been severed. Now, it seemed, he was alone with his memories. Within a month, Picasso began a major series of etchings, conjuring up his youthful adventures in Spain.
He's thinking about his childhood, about his father, who seems to be always kind of omnipresent in his work. He spent a lot of time in Barcelona, going to the so-called School of Life, paying frequent visits to some brothels, and there he became friendly with some prostitutes. And we know that very early on he was exposed to some dramas, such as the play of Celestina, which might have shaped his mind and heart. But yes, Celestine is definitely an echo to his own life. Celestina is one of the greatest characters in Spanish literature. It's a character which was invented in the Renaissance by this great writer, Fernando de Rojas. It tells the story of a woman who is the tenant of a brothel, and she's helping a desperate couple to solve their love affair. Celestina is cruel. She's cruel because she's helping, but at the same time, this help leads to execution of the characters. It's a tragic comedy, which is something Picasso was always attracted to throughout his life.
In old age, Picasso was also haunted by the image of his father, which unexpectedly came to life.
Une fois, Pierrot est rentré d'Italie et il avait laissé pousser sa barbe. Et il était très brun par le soleil. Donc Picasso a dit « Oh, vous ressemblez à mon père ». Et il a dit « Vous voudrez bien venir demain pour faire les portraits ?» Pierrot, bien sûr, a dit oui. Et alors, on retourne chez nous, puis on y pensait. Bien sûr, on a trouvé ça merveilleux, mais on ne pensait pas que ça se ferait si vite. Et pendant que nous prenions notre petit déjeuner, le lendemain, dans notre maison, on a reçu un coup de téléphone, et Picasso a dit « Est-ce que vous êtes prêts pour l'extraction ?» Et Pierrot est arrivé, et c'est là que les premiers portraits ont été faits, d'après nature, ce qui était assez rare finalement. Enfin, après, il les a faits. Il avait posé pour un grand nombre de portraits, évidemment. Tous différents et merveilleux, évidemment, très ressemblants. Il nous regardait avec... voilà, il voyait notre jeunesse. Je pense que ça devait l'aider, probablement.
Picasso's work was a fusion of observation, memory, and fantasy. For his next series of prints, he was inspired by a story of the artist Raphael, which he used as a metaphor for his own erotic fantasies. La Fornarina was a baker's daughter who'd ignited the great painter's passions. According to the myth, Raphael's excessive lovemaking to her brought on a fever, which led to his premature death at the age of 37.
It's one of the great mystical and mythical story of the pantheon of love and art. One can see that Raphael and La Fornarina is a kind of metaphor again of Picasso's relation with the model. The story of the painter and the model is definitely the obsession of his life. For Raphael, just like for Picasso, painting and making love is the same thing, and Picasso is always dreaming of his ideal model and how you can capture a model, how you lose your identity within the model, how you project yourself within someone else and become someone new again.
The gold is certainly in a sticky situation.
In May 1968, Picasso switched on his television and watched as student unrest rocked the nation. The youth of France were pushing the country to the brink of civil war. The old artist was energized by the mood of social and sexual liberation.
It was definitely a period where things were moving. 1968 is the big social revolution, and for someone like Picasso, whose entire life is devoted to affirming power of freedom, it's something that he felt very connected with. Erotic movies were available very early on in the beginning of the 20th century, but in the 60s, some of the close-ups are really striking. And then with some of the prints, it's a bit the same. With the play of costume, you're like constantly unveiling certain parts of the body and giving the eyes this sensation of close-up. So I think these cinematographic effects somehow is something that Picasso was very well trained with.
The series, Raphael and La Fornarina, went on show immediately, but its publicity was, unsurprisingly, limited. The editor of Time magazine refused to publish what he called the inappropriate imaginings of a senile, dirty old man.
I think people have the wrong idea about old age. You don't necessarily stop screwing at 70 or 75, whatever it is. I mean, I'm 93, and I'm surprised to find that one's sexual feelings continue for quite a long time. And I don't think Picasso became non-sexual or impotent or anything of the sort. I think he went on screwing and as long as he possibly could.
On the 25th of October 1968, Picasso celebrated his 87th birthday in private. With nothing to report, global news agencies merely updated their obituaries. Behind closed doors, with astonishing vigor, Picasso began to paint dozens of large, urgent, direct images, seeking to portray the inescapable truths of life and the indignity of aging.
Picasso turned to me and said, "We have to look for something that develops on its own, something natural and not manufactured. It has to evolve just as it is, in its natural shape and not its shape in art. Grass like grass, a tree like a tree, and a nude like a nude. We do the same thing over and over again, and yet we could do anything. What is there to stop us? The great quest for freedom has begun again."
Picasso was pushing figurative art in new directions, but his expressive marks and elemental imagery had an origin and inspiration from another time.
I think in 1965, one can already feel what he would do in 1967-68. The revolution is beginning here. In Arles, they would do bullfights, and Picasso, he would travel from south of France, from the Côte d'Azur to Arles to see that bullfight. And so he had to go through the countryside where Van Gogh painted. You will see here, really, he took pleasure in painting that. It's, he marked it, it's a quick painting, and it's very loose, and the strokes, and when you're close, you don't even see that these are mountains. But when you go backwards, you will feel that these are really the picture of the area with these very wild, strange mountains.
Picasso carried with him this cutting from the local newspaper of Van Gogh's death, and he kept it with him always. It was always in his wallet. I think that Van Gogh was the filter of the sort of powers that he himself felt. And by carrying this around in his pocket, this magic piece of paper, it kept him somehow related to Van Gogh. I think that was enormously important in his life. Maybe he saw himself in the light of Van Gogh. I mean, the way Van Gogh's work suddenly grab you and seem more vivid than any other imagery you've ever seen. And I think Picasso wanted to absorb that into his own work, and I think that for a great extent he did it.
By November 1968, Picasso had embarked upon a new phase of intense painting. He projected on his studio wall the works of Rembrandt, another hero. Picasso appreciated his stoical acceptance of old age, but even more the vitality and vigor that flowed from Rembrandt's maturity and wisdom.
There are 3 pictures, and they are all inspired actually by Rembrandt, because after his illness in 1965-66, he read a book about Rembrandt, and that's why these figures come up. And you see the Dutch pipe, and you see the collar. And so Rembrandt was very much on his mind at that period. Here we have again a Rembrandt figure with the Dutch pipe. He took every freedom to paint, no rules anymore, and he would just, how he felt that he needed a collar somewhere, and he just did whatever his brush would like to do. But it's not the picture of an old man. He was younger there than he was in his blue pictures.
Il y a une énorme différence entre Picasso peintre et Picasso dessinateur. Il y avait dans sa tête comme un sablier invisible. Et pour chaque œuvre qu'il entreprenait, il se réservait dans sa tête une certaine quantité de temps. Et évidemment, avec cette quantité de temps X, on travaillait en grand tableau, et les tableaux de la dernière période sont plus grands qu'avant. Ça devait aller beaucoup plus vite. Et pour un dessin dans un petit format, évidemment, avec cette quantité de temps, il pouvait travailler beaucoup plus soigneusement, beaucoup plus lentement. C'est pour ça, dans le dernier tableau, il y a une vitesse, une fulgurance qui s'approche de celle de Pollock. Et dans les dessins, il y a une certitude, une lenteur, exactitude qu'il reproche à Ingres. Il y avait une douleur dans cette peinture de Picasso. Il y a une violence, il y a une énergie qu'il n'y avait pas toujours avant dans son œuvre. On montre un homme qui lutte contre la mort, qui veut survivre, qui veut créer. Il y a quelque chose de véhément dans l'œuvre. Il y a quelque chose d'inexplicable dans cette recherche de vivre.
Now well into his 88th year, Picasso was finally ready to display his latest work, with no frames, on bare stone walls, at the Palais des Papes, Avignon. He personally curated the show in a direct, no-nonsense way, letting the intense confrontational paintings, the raw reality of love in old age, speak for themselves. The exhibition opened on the 23rd of May 1970. To those expecting classic Picasso, the new work was now unrecognizable. To his enemies, his images were simply obscene. As one critic said, the incoherent scrawls of a frenetic old man in the antechamber of death.
I know I've talked to endless people at the time. People said, it's so sad, isn't it? I mean, he's really lost it. And I said, absolutely not. I mean, it's the reverse. Here he is in old age, really embarking on a whole new period, as it were.
Picasso m'a demandé une fois, qu'est-ce que pensent les gens de mon travail aujourd'hui? Et il avait lu des critiques plutôt très désagréables et je pouvais me permettre de le dire parce que de témoin du fait que ce n'était pas la vérité. Il dit, les gens disent que vous êtes trop vieux pour tenir le crayon, que vous tremblez et c'est pour ça votre style est devenu tellement inégal et incontrôlé, incontrôlable. Il m'a regardé, il a pris une feuille de papier et avec le crayon, sans arrêter, il a fait un cercle parfait sur le papier. Il m'a regardé après pour me montrer qu'il avait toujours le calme et la possibilité de travailler avec la même exactitude.
Above all, Picasso still had the urge to create on his own terms. Images poured out of him, seemingly effortlessly.
As Picasso said to me, you can make the most appalling efforts and sweat blood over your canvases, but nobody's making you do it. Anyway, you, the painter, you've done this work, and that's something, so you're happy. I'll tell you why. At the moment you do it, it brings some sort of release. And that is the essential thing.
C'est un de mes tableaux préférés, c'est vrai, parce qu'il est très bien construit et il est peut-être le dernier grand tableau de Picasso. Et on peut presque dire ce tableau est un résumé de sa vie. Un homme au moment de la mort qui a sa vie qui passe comme un film. Et qu'est-ce qu'il retrouve dans ce tableau? Évidemment, la période rose, la période bleue, la construction cubiste, c'est-à-dire un tableau très construit à la différence des autres, et en même temps, son sujet préféré, le couple, l'amour, et en même temps, une chose, je crois, terrifiante. Regardez derrière ce bleu, c'est la mer qui va tout inonder de tsunamis, si vous voulez. C'est un cataclysme, c'est la fin, c'est un naufrage de l'humanité, de l'humain, très dramatique et très émouvant.
On the 21st of October 1971, President Georges Pompidou opened an exhibition in the Grand Gallery of the Louvre in Paris to celebrate Picasso's 90th birthday. He was the first living artist to receive this honor. But Picasso, once more, had no time for looking back. He continued to work full-time, perhaps feeling that if he stopped again, he would stop forever.
The last paintings of Picasso are immensely strong. Basically, they are nearly all head and shoulders of sometimes women, nearly always of men, and the man is nearly always himself. And they're kind of visions of himself, sometimes horribly funny. There's a bit of disguise thrown in, but they're all about himself. The darkness of his nature he seems to be exploring. It's very Spanish in that respect. I mean, it just gets darker and darker and darker. And it's like a long fight against death and seeing himself, and it is wonderful, intensely moving to watch. And far from being an old man who can't do it anymore, they are superbly done. They're inventive as ever, as well as being intensely moving.
Tout d'un coup, Picasso a découvert cette nécessité de consulter son visage, c'est-à-dire encore de voir le passage du temps sur son visage, sur son corps. Et là, on voit des autoportraits avec des yeux pleins d'angoisse. On montre comment Picasso était perturbé par le temps qui passe, par la mort qui approche.
famous 1972 portrait, we did see that, and it was difficult because it was obvious that it was a self-portrait, but it was something like an adieu, and we didn't want to see that, actually. My father and me were in Cannes in April 1973, and we saw Picasso coming back from a trip in the car, and we saw him like a head which already is dead. And then in the night of the 7th to 8th April, there was a huge storm over the Côte d'Azur, a thunderstorm, horrible weather. And by chance, I opened the radio in the hotel room at 4 o'clock, and it was announced that that night Picasso had died. I never forget that. And it was really, you know, that weather and Picasso's death, it was like a revolution in the sky also.
Picasso died today at his country home at Mougins on the French Riviera, overlooking the rust-colored hills and the blue Mediterranean, which had become his spiritual home. He was 91. His death came as a surprise to his wife, Jacqueline, and to the few friends who had visited him recently, still hard at work in his immense, cluttered studio. Picasso had seemed as indestructible as the thousands of artworks he had created over 8 decades. The wealthiest of artists, Picasso's total fortune had been estimated at $50 million in paintings, real estate, and investments. He will undoubtedly be recorded by history as the greatest painter of the 20th century, and perhaps the greatest multifaceted artist of all times. He had not made a public appearance in 3 years. Picasso left his villa only occasionally to visit a dentist or to shop in Nice. Now, he is making the final journey.
Even in death, the artist kept the world at bay. Behind locked gates on the 16th of April 1973, Pablo Picasso was buried in the grounds of his chateau at Vauvenargues, with only Jacqueline, his son, and a few close friends in attendance.